Hello and welcome to the course of Programming Fundamentals with Python. Week number 16 is going to be the last week for this course. In this course, we studied the basic of Python language. However, if the course finishes, it doesn't mean that we have covered all the aspects of the language. I would plan to start another series of videos in which I will discuss about the object-oriented concepts of the Python language. But for now, this is going to be the last week of the part 1 of this course. In today's lecture, I am going to talk about a very important topic which is known as file handling. Here is a brief roadmap for today's presentation. I will start with objectives, the outcomes of this lecture, and after that I will give you some background about the concept of the file, different types of files, access methods that we can use for accessing the files, file name, file type, and file objects. And after that we will see how we can actually work with files inside Python language. It includes how we can open a file, how we can read data from a file, how we can write data to the file, and finally we will see how to delete a file from Python or by using Python. The objectives are pretty much clear. At the end of this week, you will be able to learn how to access, how to open, how to close, how to read, how to write, and how to delete a file. In simple words, you will be able to perform different operations on a file. You will also learn about different file modes and different operations, and all these concepts will enable you to write programs that will demonstrate the concept of file handling. Let us start with a background. The programs that you have written until now, it only requires the user to enter the data each time the programs run, because our programs store data in the RAM, random access memory, and once the programs stop running, the data disappeared. Now think, if a program is to retain the data between the times it runs, it must have a way of saving the data for later use. And when a program needs to save data for later use, it has to write the data in a file, and the data can be read from the file at a later time. So data is saved in a file which is usually stored on computer hard disk or simply disk. And once the data is saved in a file, it will remain there after the program stops running, or even you shut down your computer. You can say that data stored in a file can be retrieved and used at a later time. And Python is not the only solution which actually make use of the file. Most commercial software packages that we use on our daily in our daily life, day-to-day basis, they actually store the data in files. For example, you are pretty much familiar with word processors like MS Word or LibreOffice packages. They actually they are used to write letters, memos, reports, assignments, and other documents. And the documents are then saved to files so they can be edited and printed later on. Similarly, image editor software packages. Image editing programs are used to draw graphics and edit images, such as the ones that you take with the digital camera, and then you use the tools like Adobe Photoshop to work with those images. So the images that you create or edit with an image editor are actually saved in files. Same is the case with spreadsheets, MS Excel. These are actually programs that used to work with numerical data, calculations, analysis purposes. So number and mathematical formulas can be inserted into rows and columns of the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet can then be saved in a file. So files are everywhere. Games are also there, which actually store the user profiles, the score you have made in a game for ladder purposes. And many computers games, they actually store the data in files, the list of player, their names, their profiles, etc. All things are stored in a file. Similarly, web browsers, sometime when you visit a web page, the web browsers store a small file which is known as cookies on your computer. And cookies typically contain information about the browsing session, such as the contents of the website that you have visited. And program that are used in daily business operation, they actually rely on these files. Okay, so files are everywhere, and programmers usually refer to the process of uh, saving the data into file as writing the data. There are two terminologies: writing data and reading data. If you are a programmer, you will come across these words very oftenly. First, let us see what writing data means. When a piece of data is written to a file, then the process is known as writing data, or the process of saving data in a file is known as writing data. But what actually happens when you write data to a file? When a piece of data is written, it is copied from a variable in RAM to a file. And this is illustrated in the figure here. You can see that we have a hard disk here, and we are going to write the data onto this hard disk or to the file which is stored on a hard disk. You can see we have variables like pay rate, employee ID, and employee name, and these variables held some data, but the data is in RAM. So if you want these values to be copied from the RAM to the hard disk, then this process is known as writing data. And this is how we actually write data or store data in a file or to the hard disk. In a similar way, the process of retrieving the data from a file is known as reading data. Now here a piece of data is read from a file which is stored on a hard disk. You can say the contents of the file is copied from the file which is stored on the hard disk to the RAM, which is referred by variables. And this is actually illustrated in this figure. Okay, so you can write data to the file from RAM, or you can read data from the hard disk to the RAM. The process of writing is like actually the saving of data, and the reading is actually retrieving the data from the hard disk. When you play with the files, you are actually opening the file, and then you are processing the file, and at the end you are closing the file. And these steps we will see in a moment, how we can actually open a file, process a file, and close a file. Let us see another concept which is known as file types, and I'm quite sure if you have the know-how of computer, then you must know about the file types. Some of the files are in binary form, some of the files are in text form. A text file actually contains data that has been encoded as text using schemes like ASCII, like Unicode, but we will not go into the details of those concepts. For simplicity, whatever you write in a file which contains characters like ABC, numbers like 0, 1, 2, and special characters like hash, $8, $sign, etc. They are actually a series of characters which contribute to a file. And then you can open that file to view the contents using text editor like Notepad, like Word, MS Word, etc. So these are the examples of the way we deal with the text file. On the other side, we have a binary file which contains data that cannot be converted or that has not been converted into text. You can say that the data that is stored in a binary file is intended only for a program to read, not for the users to read. And as a consequence, you cannot view the contents of a binary file with a text editor. Although Python will allow you to work with both type of files, text file and binary file, but we will only work with text files to keep the things simple. And we will use a simple text editor like Notepad or Sublime editor to work with the text files. And our text file will contain only characters. But you can use special characters, special symbols, and numbers as well. We also have some file access methods, and some of them are, the most important one is sequential access and random access. Actually, most programming languages provide two different ways to access the data which is stored in a file. The first one is sequential. When you work with a sequential access file, you access data from the beginning of the file to the end of the file. There is a sequential access. If you want to read a piece of data that is stored at the very end of the file and you are using the sequential access method, then you have to read all of the data that comes before it, which means you cannot jump directly to the desired data. And this is very much similar to the older cassette tape players. If you want to listen to song number 5, then there is no way to directly jump to the song number 5. First you have to forward song number 1, then song number 2, then song number 3 and 4 in order to reach and play song number 5. So if you want to listen to the last song of a cassette tape, you have to fast forward all the songs that come before it, or you have to listen them. Okay? There is no way to jump directly to a specific song. And that resembles, this analogy resembles the sequential access method. On the other hand, we also have another method which is used by programmer, and that is known as the direct access method. When you work with a direct access file method, which is sometimes known as random access method as well, you can jump directly to any piece of data in the file without reading the data that comes before it. And the analogy is similar to a CD player or an MP3 player. The way it works, you can jump directly to any song that you want to listen at that time. However, in this week or in the practical session, we will be focusing only on the sequential access method, but you can also use random access method. Another concept which is important to understand for working with file is that of the file name and file objects. Most computer users are familiar with the fact that files are identified by a file name. For example, you created a document with a word processor and saved the document in a file. You have to specify a file name in order to store the file, in order to save the file. Even when you use like Windows Explorer or search mechanism to examine or to search for a file, then you have to mention the name of the file for which you are looking for. There are also other methods available for searching, but normally we use the search mechanism in order to search for files by using their names. And each operating system has its own rule for naming the files. For example, many systems support the use of file name extensions. Okay, whenever you want to save a file, to give a name to a file, you have to specify the extension. Like the extension of the MS Word file is .doc or .docx. Similarly, the extension of an image file could be a JPG, JPEG file, for example. It could be BMP file, it could be EPS file, TTF file, etc. Okay. In a similar way, there are files, text file, which have the extension .txt, which stand for text. In a similar way, the doc stand for document. In Python, in order for a program to work with a file which is stored on a computer hard disk, you have to specify the name of the file along with the extension. And beside that, we also need file objects. A file object is an object that is associated with a specific file, and it provides a way for the program to work with that file. Like variables, which actually refer to the values. The file object actually refers to the file. Okay. And actually we will see in the practical session that we will be creating a file object or a variable which will actually reference to the file object. And this variable is used to carry out any operation that are performed on a file. So file objects are required to perform operations on that file. And this concept can be also seen like this. If you have a file which is stored on the hard disk and you want a variable to operate on the contents of this file, then you have to use it, access it with the help of the file object. So it is like an intermediate between a variable and the actual contents of the file, and it is required to perform operations on the contents of that file. We will see it in a moment. Now coming towards some practical terminologies to work with files. The first thing is opening a file. We use the open function in Python to open a file. And this is very obvious. If you want to work with a file, you have to open the file first. And the open function is there. When you use the open function, it actually creates a file object and associate it with a file on the disk, the file with which you are working. Okay. So the key concept here is that whenever you want to open a file in Python, you have to use the open function. And this function will take two parameters, file name and mode of the function. And this is actually the general format. This is the file variable. Remember, we need it because we will refer to the file later on with the help of this file variable. And then open is the function along with two parameters. File name is actually going to be a string, and that will specify the name of the file along with extension. And mode is a string which will specify the mode, whether you want to read the file, whether you want to write something to the file. So you have to specify it here. And there are going to be 4 different methods, 4 different modes for opening a file. You can open a file in a read mode for reading purpose. If you provide R in the mode, then it will open the file only for reading purposes. And this is the by default value, by the way. If you do not write anything here in the mode, the by default option that is going to be considered by the interpreter is R. The file will be open only for reading. However, it is important to understand that if you want to open a file and the file does not exist, then it will give you an error. Okay. If you want to open a file for reading, but the file does not exist, then it will give you an error. You can also open a file to append something to it. Append means adding something to the file at the end of the file. But the good thing about it is that if you want to open a file that does not exist, it will not give you an error. Rather, it will create the file and then will append the text to that file. So this is a big difference between opening a file for reading purpose and opening the file for appending purpose. The first one will give you an error if the file does not exist, while the second one will create the file if it does not exist. Finally, you can open a file for writing purposes as well. It is like the append, but the difference is you can write something to the file anywhere that you want. And like the append method, it will also create the file if it does not exist. Okay, these are not the only modes. There are some other modes as well, like X, which create the specified file, and it will return an error if the file exists. That is like opposite of the writing and append. Okay, X mean you are going to create a file for the first time, and if the file exists, it will give you an error. Hey, the file is already there, you cannot create it. It is the difference. Besides, we also have some other modes like T, like B, but we will not go into the details. One thing that is important to remember for opening the file is to specify the location of the file. Where is your file actually located? Okay, so when you pass the file name, sorry, that will not contain a path as an argument to the open function. The Python interpreter assumes that the file location is the same as that of the program. Let me simplify it. Whenever you want to open a file, you have to specify the file name along with extension like this, test.txt. But suppose you do not provide this complete location. But that is only the case if the Python or the interpreter is in the same folder where the file is located, or the file is in the same folder where the Python is located, or you can say both are in the same folder. Then there is no need to provide the extension, the whole complete path. If they are in the same folder, just write name of the file along with extension, and that's it. But if, for example, the Python is installed in the C drive and your file is in the D drive, then you have to specify the complete location of the file. Otherwise, it will give you an error. Okay. Normally, the Python is located in the C users folder or in the programs files in Windows. In Linux, the location is different. So if you want to open a file which is in different location, you have to specify a path. This is the path. Okay, so it contain like my file test.txt, where it is stored in C drive, and then in C drive I have a folder with the name users. Inside the user folders I have another folder Ali. Inside the Ali folder I have another subfolder temp, and inside the temp I have the file test.txt. Now interpreter will go to this location to access the file test.txt, and this is known as specifying the location, and this is required only when the file and the Python are not in the same folder. I hope it will be clear to you. Okay, once you have opened the file, now you can read the file, you can write something to the file. For reading data from a file, you have to read another function that is known as the read function. And this is a built-in function, like the open function. Actually, the open function returns a file object, and that has a read method for reading the contents of the file. And if the file has been opened for reading using the R mode, you can use the file object read method to read the entire content in the RAM or in the memory. When you call the read method, it returns the file content as a string, and they are displayed on the screen with the help of the print method. We will see this program in the practical session. But what to understand here, this is the variable. So we have a variable with the name f, and we are calling the open method to open the file students.txt. Now here I do not specify the complete path because in this case I am assuming that my interpreter and my file is in the same folder, and I'm going to open this file in a reading mode only. This will open the file only. It will not display anything on the screen. Now if you want to read the contents of this file, you have to specify another function, that is read, and this is actually we are applying it on the object, on the variable f. Read the contents from the file and display the contents on the screen. At line number 3, we have another method, that is close, and this is optional, but it is recommended whenever you open a file. It is recommended to close the file as well at the end of the program. If you do not write this statement, it doesn't matter, your program still will work fine. But this is a good programming purpose and a recommendation to close the file that you have opened for security purposes as well. Now this is how we can actually read data from a file. Okay, this read method will actually read the whole contents of the file. Sometimes we are interested to read only a single line from the file, and that is possible with the help of read line method. Actually, this method will display the content of the first line. So in Python, you can use the read line method to read a line from a file. A line is simply a string of characters that are terminated with a \n. So this method will return the line as a string, and this will also include \n, which means after displaying the line, the cursor will move to the next line. If you want to display another line, then it will be displayed on a new line. Okay. Now this will display only the first line. If you want to display the second line, then you have to call this method for the second time, like this. And if you want to display the third line, then you have to call this method for the third line, for the fourth time, and so on. So this will display the contents line by line. If you call it 2 times, you can read the first 2 lines. If you call it 3 times, you can read the first 3 lines, and so on. Sometimes we are interested to read a file only a few characters of the file. Let's suppose the first 5 characters. For that, you can specify something inside the parentheses. You have to use the read method with the number of characters that are required to be read from the file. Now this is about reading. Sorry. How to read the entire file content, how to read lines, and how to read specific number of characters. Besides reading, you can also write data to the file. But like the reading, first you need to open the file. Same is the case with writing. If you want to write something to a file, you have to open the file. And the file object method is used for that purpose. And then you have to use another method that is known as write. For reading, we use read method. For writing, we have to use the write method. And this is actually the file variable which we have seen here. This is actually the file variable. Okay, so let us see the modes of a file. If it is for writing purposes, like the reading purposes, we have different modes: W, A, and X. X is for create, remember? If you want to create a new file, then write X. And if the file already exists, it will return an error. If you want to append something to the file, to an existing file, then you have to provide A. And if you want to write something to the file at any location, then you have to write W. These are different modes which are available for writing data to the file. And here is an example which shows how we can append something to a file that already exists. First thing, this is the syntax to open the file: variable name, open method. You have to specify 2 things here: name of the file along with extension, which is test.txt. I assume that they are in the same folder. If the test.txt file is in a different location, then you have to provide the complete path. And this is actually the mode. I want to open this file for a pen purpose, so I have written A here. After that, I'm interested to write something at the end of the file, so I have to call the write method, and this is the string. You see this, the syntax here, the string, write method, and then provide the string. Now what will happen, this line will be added to the file test.txt, but at the end. Okay, we will see the practical implementation of this program in the practical session class of this week. And as I just mentioned, it is a good programming practice to close the file that you have just opened. So here in the third line, I have closed the file. After writing a line to it, I close the file. Now I want to read the file, the contents of this file. So for that, first open the file and then read the file. Now if you read this, the content of this file, you will see that the line has been added there with the help of append mode. Similarly, you can use the write method to write more than one lines to the file. First, you have to open the file, and in the mode you have to provide W, not A. And then what's happening at line number 2, line number 3, and line number 4? We are actually writing 3 lines to this file students.txt. Write Ali, come to next line, write Bilal, come to next line, and then write John, come to next line, and then close the file. Once you read this file, it will contain these 3 new lines, Ali, Bilal, and John. So first we open the file student.txt using the W mode. This causes the file to be created and opens it for writing. It also creates file object in memory and assign that object to the variable f. And then the next statements from line 3 to 5, they actually write 3 strings to the file. Line 3 will write Ali, line 4 will write Bilal, and line 5 will write John to the file. Sorry, line 2 will write, Ali, Bilal, and then John. So line number 2 to 4 is for actually writing the string to the file. And finally, we close the file at line number 5. After this program run, the 3 strings will be written to the file. One thing that is important to notice is that each of the string written to the file end with \n, which you will recall is the new line escape sequence, if you remember. Actually, it not only separates the items that are in the file, but also causes each of them to appear in a separate line when viewed in a text editor. So it is important to put at the end of the string. So this was about writing data to the file. Finally, we will see how we can delete a file. Deleting a file is simple, but I will warn you, do not apply this option for practices, because you may lose your important data. But just to let you know that it is possible to delete a file from Python as well. Even folder, you can delete them. For deleting a file, you need to import library, which is OS, and then you have to call the method remove, and you have to specify the name of the file that you want to remove. If it is in the same folder, just write the name with extension. If it is in a different location, then you have to specify the complete path. Now this 2-line code will remove the file from the hard disk permanently, so be careful. Sometimes we want to delete a file, but the file does not exist. So we need to modify our code. And for that, we need to check whether the file exists. If it exists, remove it. If it does not exist, print a message. The file that you want to delete does not exist. For that, the code is like this. Check. Provide the path. If statement. If it is true, if the file exists, then remove the file. and if it is false, the file does not exist, then display the message the file does not exist. We will see this program in the practical session. Thank you so much for watching the video. In this lecture, we studied basic concepts related to file handling in Python. See you in the practical session. Goodbye and take care.